Ribbon Road was one of the first tracks in series history to be a true innovation on what a course setting could be. As such, it quickly became a fan favorite, but its return to Mario Kart 8 was a little controversial. Sections were introduced. Instead of just a red ribbon, you now have a green enemy section and a blue anti-gravity section, with shortcuts replacing all the scattered boost panels from the originals. So, how did it translate to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe? Well, I think it's one of the more interesting courses in the game, because, it's a mixed course, where comebacks are more than possible. However, it's also, a track that, you can just disappear in first place on. Specifically, I would classify this as a mid-spot runner. Now, there are a lot of avenues to take an early lead here, and ironically, the first big off-road cut, located in the green section, is often more helpful to a potential frontrunner than to someone trying to make a comeback. If you can pull a shroom using your mid-spot first set, you'll be in great shape to get an early lead, and that's where a lot of front runs will begin. When starting in these positions, I feel I pull a mushroom more often than not, so it's quite useful and somewhat consistent. The final Shroomspot at the end of the lap is the more notable shortcut and one that is more useful to making these comebacks. However, there are a lot of ways to utilize it up front. Breakaway group front runs are frequent on this course, meaning you can often get mushrooms if there's someone else just a little bit ahead of you. They tend to be worth holding for this cut as well. There are NISCs to practice on this blue section, the first of which is a very easy part of your normal racing line, and the second of which is harder and more timing based on how you execute it, and there are valid reasons to actually pass both of these up. The first cut is a deadly back spot, so be careful about who you follow onto it, and what item they have in hand or even in pocket. Additionally, there are coins to be had by going around it. This is also true for the second cut here, however going around here is interesting for another reason too. Bananas in particular are deadly on the second NISC because of the double box, but going around grants you a safer chain while also temporarily increasing your distance from first place. Going around can actually be faster if you pull a shroom because of it, so keep this in mind. How you do the second cut will largely be based on the wave you have. You'll need to be able to react to what you see and be able to execute every time you approach a situation. If you have a high wave, go for a trick and get 2 in a row before the glider. It's quite fast and easy, so you just have to have the confidence to know where you will land. If you can't get a trick, you have some options. For me, I like to hold my mini turbo and do a boosted trick on the ramp because I find it to be reliable and not slippery. This is not as fast, but if I'm in a pressure situation with enough space around me, I like to use it as a safeguard. You can also hop without tricking, which is typically a faster option, but I find it hard to maintain a straight line doing this, so be careful and make sure to get comfortable with this before doing it online. The important thing is to learn how to not fall off in this section, and you should be able to tell when you're going to slide off the course. One thing I'll do if I know I messed up is quickly mash start plus L to activate smart steering. As long as your initial hop isn't horrible, you will be saved, and the glider provides the ideal place to turn it off again immediately after without the loss of speed. Keep in mind that you need proper space to do this NISC. If you get spin boosted, it's probably over. So to be good here, it's necessary to know this NISC and know when to play it safe, because going wide is much faster than falling off. So let's talk about the beginning of the course now. You should be able to get a super mini turbo on the first turn. If you can't get one with good alignment, I recommend brushing up on soft drifting again. You could also use a counter op here if you're having trouble. So let's talk about the ramps early in the lap now. These are necessary to go over if you even want to start a front run in a higher level lobby, and it's definitely a must-learn technique. Don't skip out on these until you get them down. Keep a few things in mind when attempting these though. 1. You need to charge a regular mini turbo. 2. To get this mini turbo, you need to take advantage of the bump halfway up to the boost panel, and you can use it as an indicator on where to start your drift, and you typically want to start the drift around the middle of the road. And lastly, you need to trick at the apex of the ramps, and while doing it, hold in the direction that you plan to land. So for the first ramp, you're going to hold left. For the second, you're going to hold right a bit. Keep in mind that if you're shrooming up at the first shroom spot, you still need to execute the second ramp strat. This can be a much tougher angle, notably get the double box on the left side on top of everything. Definitely practice in versus mode to make sure you can still get that double when you do the shroom up. Assuming you get a front run, you'll likely get some distance. And while this track does have a deadly target shock spot for people up front, the second half of the course is not very nice to golden, mushrooms, or bullet bill users, which actually works to a front runner's advantage quite well. There's a really nice back spot for green shells on the green path. Having that option can help extend leads, even if it's just through opponents going wide as well. While getting target shocked is brutal right before an ending cut, there's often counterplay, namely in 6 vs 6 where you can expect a target shock. To start, the most common place to expect a shock in a free-for-all setting is the last set of lap 2 at the glider section. If you're in the back, what this means is you should probably want to make sure you have a dodge item to chain at the last set, even if it means, holding something through the second set. Getting target shocked late lap 2 in the back is frequently a race ender, especially since this is the best place to catch up. If you don't have any items, that makes it really hard, so this is really the disaster scenario that you want to avoid at all costs. Because this shock happens at the last set so often, if you find yourself in a lap 3 situation in a 6 vs 6, teammates with their own dodges can essentially force an opponent to dodge them. With lots of tricking, boost panels, and a glider, it is typically easy to use a neutral shock to benefit those up front as well if you pull your own. If you're in a situation where you are 100% certain an opponent has a shock, or you just want to call a nice neutral shock, you can absolutely mind game them on the glider section as well. In the past, with enough speed and a good wave or a mushroom, you can intentionally fall off at pretty quick speeds. You can also just dip down at the end if you really want to, make a hard read or something. And it seems that this might have unfortunately been patched out, but you can still trigger a long forward respawn in a few ways. Because of how long this respawn is, you get a huge window to dodge even enemy shocks if executed properly. Alternatively, using neutral shocks to get teammates into the glider may be useful, as mentioned earlier, because speed remains steady while small, and even if you dodge a few people on the other team in the back, the blue section is not particularly amazing to dodge on, really. Stars are very weird to control in this section, for instance, with all the cuts, as are golden mushrooms and bills. Matter of fact, there are really only a few good bill spots on this track. Bills go around shortcuts on this course, but perhaps more annoyingly, a bullet bill will take you over the second set completely. If you're trying to avoid being target shocked to the final glider, as mentioned earlier, this is particularly deadly because you'll likely have no item to begin with when your bill ends. So make sure that you aren't using your bullet bill in a spot where it's just going to fly over this set. If I pull a first slot bullet bill at the first set, I usually spam it immediately because it allows me to properly chain for a double box at the second set. Waiting out here is losing. Another good bullet bill spot is simply in the cut at the end of the lap. This will take you through the first set, but covers the shortcut in some solid distance. The same goes for goldens in this spot as well. You'll have to forgo the ramp MT to start the lap, but this is one of the better spots since the blue section is not a very good place to use one. Alternatively, starting a golden on the glider is good if you want to get a new item to start the lap. What about pulling shocks in this course though? Well, you're likely going to have better odds of pulling a meaningful shock earlier in the lap. The last set is in the air after glider ramps, so you'll have to just hope to get fortunate at one of those double boxes. And the first and second sets, well, they allow you time to stop, so it's more likely to, pull a shock at one of those sets. Keep in mind though, there is high risk to holding onto a shock for too long, but also very high reward. So overall, what do I think about this? Well, I still think that this is an underrated track to practice. There's a lot of reward to being good here in my opinion, and it shows up a decent amount, not like a ton, but enough. This is a course in my opinion you should be comfortable starting from really any spot on the track whatsoever, so if you're confident in your abilities here, you may find it quite useful for track picking.